All right, thank you, Todd. So happy to be, closing out the session today and sharing some of the work that our office, as well as a number of other partners and agencies, have been conducting to reintroduce Lake Sturgeon into Lake Erie. Here's just a quick snippet of our crew getting ready to tag a bunch of fish at Genoa National Fish Hatchery, who has been kind of an instrumental partner in these reintroduction efforts where most of the fish that have been stocked in Lake Erie have been coming from this hatchery, um, or I guess at least half for the Maumee River. So I just want to take the time to acknowledge everyone who's been involved with this work. I guess like Chris said, if we wanted to list all the individual co-authors, it would be a very big slide with a lot of tiny text. So just instead sharing the logos of the different groups and agencies who have been involved with this. Big thanks to Department or Ohio Division of Wildlife, New York DEC, and some of the other management authorities who have been kind of driving the decisions to reintroduce Lake Sturgeon into Lake Erie. So as I go through the slides, please just keep these folks in mind. They've all been kind of instrumental in this work. I think this is probably a slide that we're all fairly familiar with the Lake Sturgeon story, but just to orient everyone to kind of where we're going here. Historically, Lake Sturgeon spread throughout kind of north central North America. You can see that in the blue shaded area in this map. The orange regions are showing where they're currently located. It might look like in the Great Lakes that's kind of a stronghold for them, and in some regards it is, but population sizes are about 1%, maybe less within the Great Lakes region compared to where they were kind of pre-settlement times. In Lake Erie in particular, from Goodyear et al., we think there were about 19 spawning stocks of lake sturgeon in the lake. That was represented by about somewhere between 300,000 and 1.1 million adults, based on some of the catch records, and I'm back calculating the number of fish that would be required to support a fishery of that size back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. They were fished pretty hard, and coupled with habitat loss, what we see currently is essentially two stocks of lake sturgeon remaining in the lake, and kind of at both ends, not much in the middle. In the St. Clair Detroit River, this is the larger stock of fish, about 28,000 adults. And in the upper Niagara, Buffalo Harbor area, estimating about 700 adults in that section of the river. And if I kind of taking a closer look at those two populations, real quick here, in the St. Clair Detroit River, we have evidence that that's a growing population. We see recent and regular recruitment with some of the surveys that our office conducts, as well as Michigan DNR, and that gives us a lot of confidence that that's a good, strong population to use as a donor population for some of these reintroduction efforts. Contrast that with the Niagara River population. Recent surveys targeting juvenile fish and the population as a whole indicate that this is likely an aging population. There hasn't been a whole lot of recruitment in recent years. I don't think there's the Lower Lakes office has documented any in some of their more recent surveys. So that is a subject of growing interest, and currently there's been a number of hypotheses generated to kind of better understand what's going on there and what potential bottlenecks there are with that population. And so more research forthcoming, and hopefully something to share in future as we begin to kind of get a better understanding of what's going on in the upper Niagara. But where this brings us is, ultimately, if we want to see lake sturgeon coming back into Lake Erie proper, there's a need for reintroduction. Population sizes are still pretty small, even in the St. Clair Detroit River system. Straying rates between those populations and into some of the other tributaries where sturgeon once spawned is low, and just given that the generation times for the species is on the order of 10 to 20, something maybe even longer in terms of years, it's unlikely we'll see these the species return in any sort of relevant management timeline on their own. So this gets us to reintroduction, which kind of follows a process outlined by the Great Lakes Genetic Stocking Guidelines. Kind of starts with understanding, is there an existing population in most of Lake Erie? With the number of surveys that are going on, we have a pretty good idea that there's not at least any self-sustaining populations within the lake proper or some of those tributaries. And then looking into different habitat constraints, making sure that the systems that we're interested in reintroducing sturgeon can support a population. And then that ultimately leads us to our reintroduction, restoration plan, and reintroduction efforts. And coupled with that, we want to be cognitive of where fish are coming from. Again, we're able to lean pretty heavily on the Great Lakes Genetic Stocking Guidelines, some work done by Amy Welsh, Kim Scribner, and others, identifying different genetic stocking units throughout the Great Lakes. Lake Erie falls in genetic stocking unit 1, highlighted with that oval there. And so we suspect that historically, fish in Lake Erie had similar genetic makeup to the other populations within this area. The St. Clair Detroit River population is, again, one that we suspect is, a good, strong population to support reintroduction efforts. So a lot of the fish in Lake Erie, or actually all the fish currently in the reintroduction efforts, are coming from the Port Huron population. In terms of the number of fish to stock, that's going to kind of depend on, one, the target population we're shooting for. So in the Maumee River and in the Cuyahoga River, that's about 1,500 adult fish. Stocking over a 25-year time horizon. Here, the idea is to take advantage, or at least trying to understanding that sturgeon don't spawn every year. We want to build up that genetic diversity. And so if we want to have a good representation of the genetics that are available within these donor populations, we need to be collecting family units over multiple years, because we just get different individuals coming back over it might take 1, 2, even up to 6 years before we start to see a full rotation of a population on the spawning grounds. And then how many fish we stock depends on the life stage and the anticipated survival rate. So we'll just kind of highlight some of our initial assumptions here, where this is our assumed survival of fall fingerling lake sturgeon. And then over a 25-year time horizon, if we want to hit this stocking population size, here I have 750 fish. This would be females, which I think I kind of switched slides here a minute, but when we project the population out, we're kind of interested in the females, but be about 2,800 lake sturgeon, fall fingerlings being stocked each year. And so what that looks like to date, the Maumee River came online in 2018. Since then, about 20,000 fish have been stocked in the Maumee River. More recently, we saw fish stocked in the Cuyahoga River. 60 fish went in 2004 as part of a pilot study to assess movement across different stocking areas, as well as to get an estimate of survival within that system. And then last year, we saw the Cattaraugus Creek and Sandusky River come online. So within the last 2 years, we've gone from a single reintroduction effort to 4 throughout Lake Erie, and now we have reintroduction occurring in each of the 3 basins within the lake. And so as we move through these programs, one of the things we really want to make sure is that we're on track for success. These are, again, 25-year endeavors, so we want to make sure that we are going to reach those goals at the end of 25 years. Some of the questions that we have are really more long-term in terms of what are return rates of the fish as they mature, come back to reproduce, documenting recruitment that, is going to take several years, potentially decades to get at. But in the short term, we can ask questions about survival, movement rates, um, growth, and a few other indicators that would tell us if we're progressing in the right way. And we're able to lean pretty heavily on the GLaDOS network that we've heard about all week, tagging those fish, a subset of those fish that are being stocked to track their movements and then estimate survival. In the Cuyahoga River, we stocked fish in 3 locations. So furthest upstream here at Cascade Valley Metro Park, just outside of Akron. That's about 40 miles from Lake Erie. Boston Mills, about a little more than halfway between Lake Erie and the Metro Park. And then right in downtown Cleveland at Merwin's Wharf location. So we're interested in not just survival, but how fish are moving through the river. And kind of one of the hypotheses that we have is potentially the more time fish spend in the river, the more time they have to imprint on that system. Kind of a long-term question, but we can get some initial insight into how fish are moving through the river. And so as we look at these plots here up top, we have the time spent in the river, the 3 different stocking locations, and the movement rate. The astute observer will notice we don't have any data for our most downstream location. That's just simply because the most downstream receiver from that location is in the lake. And so we're not getting any movement rates within the river other than that fish are likely moving downriver. They're at least not moving further enough upriver to be detected on some of those other receivers further upstream. But at the other 2 locations, we're seeing that fish stocked further upriver spend more time in the river. So they're spending more days in the river, which isn't too surprising. They have a further distance to travel, and that's essentially probably what's going on there. They just have more river to cover, because if we look at their movement speeds, they're moving at a similar rate on a daily basis. So basically stocking fish further upriver, they stay longer in the river just as a function of the distance they have to travel. This is some data that Matt Aker shared with us. In terms of survival, we're able to use some of the work that Jordan McKenna did while she was a master's student at University of Toledo. Again, drawing on some of these fish that were tagged with acoustic transmitters. And here we have our annual survival estimates in the 3 years that she had data for. 2020, we don't have any data. There was some other things going on that prevented us from getting tags and fish, or even stocking fish that year. A couple things I want to point out is here's our initial assumption: 25% survival rate for those fish that were stocked. In 2018, we were a little bit below that, but we think that's because there's poor receiver coverage in the area that these fish were likely using in the lake. In 2019, a nearshore array went into Lake Erie, and we started detecting a lot more fish on that array. So it's likely that these 2018 fish were just kind of sneaking through a blind spot in the GLaDOS array at the time. And because of that, we weren't able to effectively disentangle survival from our ability to detect them. But in later years, we're estimating survival near over 50%, but with quite a bit of uncertainty. So there's still some work to be done to kind of get more precise estimates of survival. And that's some of the work that Michaela Kindler's doing, a PhD student at the University of Toledo. We have some 2-year tags in fish, so some tags programmed to last 2 years, hopefully get survival out beyond that first year of stocking, and also placing tags in some larger juvenile fish, get estimates of survival in those later life stages, but also can try to figure out where those fish are moving so we can monitor them more effectively. But ultimately, this kind of all plugs into a growth model or a population projection model. Schematically, it looks something like this, where we have our different life stages in the bubbles here. And then as you to progress from one stage to the next, you have to survive and you have to grow. So we can use these survival estimates to kind of project out how many fish we would expect to see reach adulthood at the end of 25 years. And, kind of based on our initial assumptions, we're on track. We're also able to look at growth rates. This is, we have about 80 fish that have been recaptured. Most of those have come from Jeff Herr and some of his fishing gear. So grateful for the support he's been able to provide this effort. See, they grow pretty fast, and then growth tops off, but that's likely a function of not having any data out beyond 8 years of age. So we will ignore this part and just kind of compare the first portion of the growth curve where we have data to growth curves from other populations within the Great Lakes. It appears that these fish are growing quite a bit faster than has been published for other populations. Couple of caveats here. These populations have a lot more data on older fish. What we're working with here is more data on these younger fish, so there could be some differences going on there. So this will change as we get more data, but just kind of a quick comparison of how things stack up. But ultimately, in the short term, we're on track. It's looking like we're on track to reach those goals, especially for the Maumee River, where we have the most data thus far. If these trends hold for the Cuyahoga, Sandusky, and Cattaraugus Creek, we will likely be seeing similar kind of indications of progressing towards reaching those management goals. In the long term, as I mentioned, this is one of those, some of these assessments that are going to take decades to actually get good, reliable information from. But we're actually approaching a point, at least at the Maumee River, where we can start addressing these questions. Go back to this growth curve in terms of recruitment and when fish come back, and are we able to assess return rates. What we have plotted up here, this is from the donor stock in the upper St. Clair River. That line is showing kind of what the lower limit of mature ripe male would be size-wise. And you'll notice we have at least one individual at 8 years old that's beyond that, and a few others that are approaching that size. So it's likely within the next few years we might start seeing fish, at least the males, returning to the Maumee River to attempt to spawn. Probably be a handful of years before we see females approaching this point. But our crews are going to start heading out onto the Maumee River within the next few weeks to start trying to see if we can document fish returning to spawn in the Maumee River. So that assessment will be starting soon. And some of the other assessments we're interested in is just kind of these long-term standardized surveys, something that we've been working with Michaela Kendler on, trying to develop some ways that we can leverage, existing surveys within the lake and figure out ways to basically kind of use the partnerships that are in existence to track trends in recruitment and abundance, or at least if we can index it somehow within the population as we transition from a stocking phase into kind of more of a recovery phase. So we're still a ways off from having any answers on that, but hopefully as time progresses, we'll be able to come up here and share some of those results and trends as we move from one phase to another. But all in all, how we see in the kind of Lake Erie as a whole, St. Clair Detroit River population seems to be doing well, indication that population is growing. In recent years, we've seen kind of a bit of growth in the number of reintroduction efforts for lake sturgeon, and that the Detroit St. Clair River population is able to support some of those, or able to support those. At least in the Maumee River, the high rates of survival of the stockfish indicate that we're on track for reaching those you know, reintroduction goals and continued support and partnership. We already have the framework in place, so it's really just a matter of keeping that going. That's going to make sure that we're able to track these populations through time and ensure that they are establishing and self-sustaining. So that's all I have. Here's my email if anyone wants to reach out, and I think the only non-sturgeon picture I have in the talk. So I don't think I've seen a buffalo picture yet this week, so we'll give them some love.